Just a little reminder before we get into this video that this vlog is of course going to contain spoilers for Lord of Chaos by Robert Jordan, as well as all of the previous books in this series. Also, a polite reminder not to leave any spoilers in my comments. I have only read 6 books in this series. I do not have the knowledge that a bunch of you guys have from having read the entire series, and so you telling me that my theories are wrong because XYZ happens in book 10 isn't really helpful, and also ruins my enjoyment of this series and the authenticity of this series of vlogs. So please just don't do it. But now that those 2 little notices are out of the way, I hope you enjoy my thoughts on Lord of Chaos. So I am pretty deep in Lord of Chaos right now, especially considering I'm just coming with you and really starting off this vlog, but I'm just past 326 pages in because I am listening to the audio and I'm somewhere in chapter 13. And I have been putting off this vlog, one, because I always put off starting spoiler vlogs, it's a real problem, but also because I don't have too much to say, which I feel for a third of the way through this book isn't ideal. But I do feel like a lot of things that are happening are very subtle to the point where I don't have a whole lot to talk about regarding them, you know? Like, I do feel like the character development is getting stronger and it's really starting to come through at this point. Like, I can definitely say that Rand is not the same person than he was at the beginning of book 1, especially because he spent like so much time in those first couple of books kind of running away from his destiny, and it's really refreshing to see him kind of stepping up and making decisions. You can't say that I agree with all of his decisions, and some of the ways that he thinks, like some of the ways that he treats some situations does feel quite like narrow-minded and sort of like hard-headed, which is obviously like one of Ron's biggest character traits, so it does fit, but it's frustrating to read. But I do definitely like to see him step into a more decisive like leadership role. Once again, like I said in the last vlog, whether that is him growing into the role and to what degree it's like influenced by Luz Theron, I don't know. Nynaeve, still don't like Nynaeve, but I do really like that, building on the last book, she is continuing to confront the things that are very frustrating and unlikable about her. She is still very, very judgmental, which is the reason why I don't think I'm ever really going to get behind Nynaeve, and her opinions of what everybody else should be doing just drive me wild. But it's interesting to see her pick up on things like the fact that she's constantly tugging her braid, and everyone knows that she does that now when she's uncomfortable. It does kind of feel, because I've always said like I don't love Robert Jordan's writing style, and I do still kind of stand by that, although I do feel like his story is quite strong in the way that it's crafted and the way that it's plotted. Now that we're coming round and he's like confronting some of this like really frustrating stuff, it does make me have a little bit more faith in him that he was kind of like aware. I don't know whether it's more of like an awareness and an intentionality from the beginning that like these things were going to be ironed out, or more of like he's been pulled up on it a little bit and people have mentioned it, so he's kind of like acknowledging that and like poking fun at it in a way, you know, like through the text. I really like, this is interesting, I really like Pedron Niall, and not as a person or like a character or anything, like he's truly awful, but I do really like his perspective. I like, in terms of adding complexity to the story, like how strong and dominant the White Cloak perspective is becoming, and I find it so interesting that he is the one in charge of it, because it just proves that this whole thing is a farce. Like, the White Cloaks are a farce. It's interesting that Maegis has fell in with them, and I truly do hate that for her. And I also do find it interesting that we're spinning so much like anti-Rand propaganda. Like, everyone's blaming everything on Rand, and it's like people like Maegis are believing it, even though she's in the hands of White Cloaks and she knows that her information is coming from White Cloaks. She's being very intelligent, she knows that she's not safe, she knows that they're trying to manipulate her, but she is still also believing that Rand is responsible for a whole ton of stuff, and she's like hoping that he isn't the one responsible for like the destruction or the continued destruction and destabilization of her kingdom, which is currently in control of Gabriel. I'm still missing Perrin's perspective, actually, and when we started this off, first off, 74-page prologue. Can we not Please, that was so much. In single speed in the audio, it was like over 3 hours, and I listened on, I think I listened to it on 1.7 as I was easing into the story, but still, that's a lot. But yeah, we had some of, was it Fail? I think it was her as opposed to Perrin in the prologue, but I thought because of that, because that prologue was essentially catching us up on what everybody else had been doing during the last book, I did think we were going to get a little bit more Perrin in this story, and so far we've had pretty much nothing. I do feel like there's potential for him to come back into it where I am at now, because I'm just at the point where Rand is in, is it Carayan? And he's met a bunch of girls that are traveling with, is it Verin? The Aes Sedai from the Bernarja, who are supposed to be going to the White Tower, but they've just discovered that the White Tower has fallen, so they're going to be trying to go elsewhere. But I feel like linking into like Emond's Field is potentially going to be a bridge back to Perrin eventually. I mean, I hope so. I know a lot of you guys in the comments, when I mentioned like the slog that's coming up, a lot of you guys said that the reason why it's such a slog is due to Perrin, and I was shook because in book 4 I loved his perspective, and I truly have been missing it. I'm not missing Egwene, I have to say that. We haven't had a whole ton of Egwene in here, and I'm not mad about it. So yeah, that's where I'm currently at with my thoughts of, oh, I also really love the Forsaken, and that with every book we're kind of getting more of them. I also like the kind of not necessarily teaming up with, but we have some of them alongside our heroes. Like Megideon is currently with Nynaeve and Elaine. Also still really intrigued about Birgitte and where her story is going long term. And is it Asmodean that is currently with Rand? And the fact that Rand is training the men, I'm finding really interesting. I feel like it's progressing faster than I expected to, with him already having like a few of the men that can channel and kind of like progressing with training them. So that is interesting, and I'm excited to see where that is going to go, especially because a lot of people are not happy about his decision to do that, even though I gotta say logically it does make perfect sense. So I think that's currently where I'm at with my thoughts. I'll try and check in with you guys a little bit more frequently now that I've got this vlog off the ground, but so far so good. I'm not like loving this one at the minute, it's just kind of fine. I feel like everything that's happening is like very slow and steady, like everything's a slow progression, which is why I haven't felt any like real urge to get this vlog started, because there's no like main thing or big things I feel for me to comment on. Everything's just like very steady right now, but it's early days. We're like a third of the way through. So we just had the reveal that Tigraine is potentially, I'm gonna say that probably Tigraine is Rand's mother, which was a little bit worrying to me at first, because I know that Tigraine is related to Morghese, which makes Rand low-key related to Elaine, but I don't think they're closely related. I think they're maybe cousins. My initial thought was that they're sisters, but I don't think that's right. But this means that I was kind of right, kind of wrong about Lord Luke over in the Two Rivers, who I thought was Rand's brother. Now, Luke is related to Rand, but he is his uncle, and I gotta say I did already know this because somebody thought they were being super clever in my Fires of Heaven, I think, vlog, and told me everything that I was wrong about, including that Luke was not Rand's brother, Luke was Rand's uncle. I mean, you gotta love the people whose only satisfaction they get in life is telling women that they're wrong. Am I right? So I did already know that bit, but the thing that is quite interesting to me right now is that Elaine and Rand do actually share a half-sibling, which I think, is it Galad? Yeah, Gawain is the one that's Elaine's brother, right? And Galad is the one that Elaine doesn't like, that is her half-brother, is now also Rand's half-brother as well. So that's interesting, tying him into the royal family. I believe that it wouldn't be his stepfather. Is it Tarangale, who is, was he the king of Carayan, or he wanted to be the king of Carayan? He, I'm pretty sure, is related to Moraine somehow, because her family, I know she mentioned, was that like way back in book 1 or book 2, she mentioned where she was originally from. So everyone's kind of getting tangled together. Do we think that Moraine's still dead? I don't know, you know. I think with people like Luke making an appearance in this book, I wouldn't put it past Moraine to spring back, especially now that we're learning more about her. I wouldn't put it past her to turn up in like book 9 or 10 or something like that. I am a little bit past this reveal now as well, and I gotta say, like, the plot, or not the plot actually, the background stuff, it seems to be progressing faster than I expected. Like, Rand is popping up schools left, right and center to bring back the old knowledge and like confound it in society, so that if the world breaks again or if something happens again, like people don't lose as much knowledge as they've lost in the past. And I feel like more time is passing in these books than I realize, because I feel like he's advancing quite a lot, and the measures that he's putting in place that generally would take quite a while seem to be happening quite quickly. But it is interesting that he is implementing these changes, because like I know that I said his character progression was slow at the beginning of this series. Now I feel like he's coming on quite quickly. Like he's made the change of like, okay, I'm gonna accept my destiny, we're gonna do this thing, and now he's like really throwing himself into it. And not only is he like fighting against the Dark One, he's also committed to bettering society and fixing things that he thinks is wrong, which is fine and I support that. But I do also think that it's interesting coming from the perspective of him being this like almost sheltered village boy his entire life. It's the same reason why Nynaeve rubs me the wrong way. It's just I would never put myself in this situation that I'm completely unfamiliar with and kind of take over. Like I would take my time learning before I start to think that I'm somebody who is qualified enough to make changes. So I'm a kind of a little bit like the audacity of that man, but also I do support the growth and like the interest in the society, as well as just like the battle with the Dark One. Oh my god, the way the plot is thickening in this book, I am living for it. Like I said about the school stuff, how Rand like seems to be improving society much faster than I ever would expect him to. The same is happening with Nynaeve and Elaine, and with them, it's the discoveries they're making, all of the stuff that was lost in terms of like all of the knowledge, all of the magic, the ability to make sangreals and terangreals and all of that kind of stuff. They're trying to figure out how Rand is now able to travel, and it all seems like it is happening over a short space of time, because I feel like it really has just happened throughout the pages of this book that I've read, with everyone only really coming together while they had the inklings of that stuff while they were traveling in the last book. I feel like they've only really put it into practice in this book, and I'm like almost 600 pages in. So in the scale of the Wheel of Time and how everything seems to have moved very slowly up until this point, I don't feel like it's that long. But Nynaeve just healed Logain, which is something that I don't know if I've mentioned it in these vlogs, but I know in one of the live shows I've mentioned like I wonder if they're going to be able to heal people at any point. Logain is very interesting as well, because I've always thought that Logain is going to be a bigger player in this story than he kind of seems to start off with, especially where we're introduced to him and he's like a false dragon, he's been gentled, and I really liked him in the last book when he became more prominent. So I'm excited to see where his character goes now, because obviously with him being a false dragon, they said that he was going mad. It could be quite dangerous for him to have his power back. This does mean that the women that have been gentled, which is Swan and it's not Elena, is it? Is it? Those two can potentially also be healed. So yeah, I'm interested to see where it's going in that regard, and also like where the magic is going to end up, like what's the end point for the magic and all of these progressions. I do kind of wish that this stuff had been paced a little bit better throughout the books that we've had, especially because I feel like books 1 to 3 definitely are very, very slow, and I feel like the progress in them is quite minimal. And in these last 2 books especially, I feel like everything's accelerating a little bit more. I feel like I had a very, I'm at the point now, and I don't know whether it's because of the audio, it very well could be, where I'm actually enjoying this series. I don't love a lot of the characters. I don't love the focus of some of the book. Like a lot of focusing on Rand and politics is, I guess, like my least favorite element of this book so far. But I find myself actually having a good time listening along to it at this point. So I kind of wish that some of this stuff had been seeded a little bit better, or would come into the books a little bit earlier, even if it's just teasers to kind of build up to this point a little bit slower in a way that I guess feels a little bit more natural. Because I feel like I would have been having a better time with the books from an earlier starting point. But yeah, I'm excited. I think I'm going to stop for the night now and go play some Fortnite before I go to bed. But the plot thickens. Did I say that? Is that how I ended the last clip? But the plot truly does thicken. So here I am again in the kitchen with my jigsaw. Have I even moved? At this point, your guess is as good as mine. But Elaine, no, not Elaine, Egwene as the Amyrlin seed. Am I surprised? Yes and no. Am I surprised that Egwene is the Amyrlin seed? Not really. I think as each of the female characters has been progressing, I feel like it is still quite obvious that Elaine is, well, I say obvious, I don't know if this is going to happen. I feel like Elaine is going to be Rand's third wife and will become the Queen of Andor. I also feel like as Egwene and Nynaeve have been growing, Nynaeve is still very driven by her emotions. She can still only channel when she's angry. She has an attachment to Lan, and she's very, I would say, ruled by emotion. Whereas we've seen Egwene become quite cold over the last few books. She has distanced herself from people. She has learned a lot from like different cultures and communities, and she has been growing almost apart from everybody else. And while she says that she like still cares about people, I feel like she is growing into an Aes Sedai. Like she has the demeanor of an Aes Sedai. So of all of the girls, Egwene becoming Amyrlin C is not surprising to me. Am I surprised that it's happening in book 6? Absolutely. Does it feel very sudden? Absolutely. Do I feel like she's qualified to be Amyrlin C? Absolutely not. I always knew that either Nynaeve or Egwene was going to be the Amyrlin C, but I thought that that was their end game. Like that was the role that they would be by book 11 in the series, or potentially like where the series ends. I didn't see it happening now, and I feel like it's an odd choice. I understand why it's happened, but I just don't feel like it's a good look having somebody who wasn't even an Aes Sedai become the Amyrlin C, somebody who has like no years of experience. It is wild to me. I do like that she's kind of shaking them up by introducing some new stuff, how she just raised Elaine and Nynaeve straight up to the level of Aes Sedai, which I mean, can we say nepotism maybe? But I do like that she's kind of shaking them up a little bit. I do feel like they need that, but I do feel like it's an interesting choice on their part, shall we say. Speaking of women, I've heard a lot of criticism regarding this series about the way that women are treated and spoken about. And you know, you always get that with dated fantasy series, so I was kind of expecting it to some degree anyway. And with that in mind, I didn't really think it was all that bad through the first like couple of books in this series, because you have like prominent female characters that are like independent, they stand up for themselves. So all that was well and good, but man, can I not cope with another woman falling all over Rand. Like the way that they literally dissolve into puddles at his feet actually makes me sick. And the way, once again, this is a problem that I've had with multiple books in the series, the way that men and women are discussed and the way they discuss each other, I really, really hate. And I kind of realized at some point, I think it was where Egwene was wanting to approach Rand, it was quite early in the book, but so many issues that I have with the interactions between genders in this series is that before a female character approaches a male one or a male character approaches a female, they have this inner monologue going up in their head where they psych themselves up to manipulate the other. Like Egwene doesn't think, oh, I need to think about the best way to talk to Nynaeve to get her to do what I want. But if she's going to talk to Rand, then she does. And it's the same for the men. Like Perrin will, or Matt shall we say, because in this book Matt is trying to get, is it Nynaeve and Elaine to go with him? Potentially Egwene as well, but no, she's the Amyrlin C, that's definitely not happening. And he is like, what is the best way that I can think of to talk to her without her being stubborn? And it's like, you spend, or they spend, should I say, so much time working out how to manipulate each other, but played off in like a quirky, funny, like, oh, this is how men and women are way. And I do understand as well that I'm reading it from the perspective of 2023, where men and women don't treat each other, or shouldn't be treating each other, in the same way that they were in when Robert Jordan was growing up and when he was writing these books. But God, does it still irritate me. And I cannot stand, like, Perrin and Fael was a lot, because I liked Fael up until the point where there's a scene in book 4, which is that the Fires of Heaven, where she sits on it, like she's spoon feeding him, and I just, no, because the thing that I loved about her is that she was like this noble born woman that like wanted to hunt the Horn, and she was like badass and independent, and she's like sat on his lap and she's spoon feeding him in a really, like, just felt like a really demeaning way. But while that is annoying and them two are annoying, I think that the way that women just fall all over themselves to get to Rand, and also to the degree the way that Matt is looking at people recently and talking about women is also not doing it for me. So I do feel like that's going to be like a recurring main point of contention with me in this series. I do have to acknowledge, of course, that I have just rubbed chili into my eye from when I made dinner earlier and thought I'd washed it all off. Why does this always happen to me? Right, well, I'm going to be wrapping this up here then, while I go rinse my eyeball out. But yeah, still having a good time. Only a few hundred pages left. I will say that in the middle we had lots of plot twists happening back to back that really like grabbed my attention, and now towards the end I feel like we're psyching up for something big to happen at the end of this one, but the in-between part has kind of like lulled a little bit for me at this point. So I finished Lord of Chaos, and I've also had a little while to kind of ruminate on my thoughts on this one. And is this my favorite book in the Wheel of Time series so far? It just well could be. And my fellow hosts, when I did the live show for this, were shocked that this one was my favorite. But I feel like despite the very slow start, we have so many oh my gosh moments in here, so much progression. And I do know that earlier in this vlog I said that like the progression in terms of the magical advancement was coming on quite quickly. I do kind of now realize that the main reason for that is because of, is it Asmodean and Megideon that are giving their secrets, like imparting their wisdom on like Rand, Elaine, Egwene and Nynaeve, which is allowing them to make these like massive magical discoveries, which does feel like a little bit of a cheat considering like the same thing is happening with like both sets of characters with two members of the Forsaken. But I feel like we're finally getting somewhere, and then the shocking moments are so much more shocking. On top of that, I've just spent so much time reading this series now that like I'm used to the status quo, the slowness of Robert Jordan's writing, and when he kind of jolts me out of that with this massive plot thing happening, I am invested. As usual, I don't love where these books end because I feel like I would really appreciate a cliffhanger ending. Like I feel like I would have liked it if this book had ended as Rand was captured by Aes Sedai and we spent some time in the next book trying to figure out how to get him back, as opposed to that happening and then being resolved within this book. I just feel like it would really help with the pacing of this series, and I do like it when books end on a little bit of a cliffhanger like that that leaves you shocked and wanting more, instead of us then like kind of resolving that issue within the last 100 or so pages of the book. I do find it interesting, of course, that all of the Aes Sedai are now kneeling to Rand, and I'm wondering if throughout the next few books in this series we're going to see him go on a little bit of a power trip. Now, because this is an older fantasy and has a lot of like classic fantasy tropes, I'm kind of worried that that power trip, hypothetical power trip because I don't know if it's happening, is going to resolve in him actually being the ruler of pretty much everything, with him being this Dragon Reborn character. Whereas I feel like some grey morality would be nice at this point, as we see him, as we are seeing him struggle with the madness, and also how Lews Therin has the ability or the potential to tip the world between light and dark. I really feel like it would be interesting to see him kind of claim too much power, and being this guy from like a small farming community, like he isn't really equipped to handle that kind of power. Like it's not something, he's not Elaine, it's not something he's ever been raised to believe is in his future. So I feel like if he had that power, there's like a big chance that he's going to mishandle it, which I feel could be interesting to read about. However, I don't necessarily think it is going to go that way. I feel like we're more on this like steady climb of Rand amassing more power. I do think that something really interesting in this book is us seeing not necessarily the true face of the Aes Sedai, but I previously have always thought of the Aes Sedai as this kind of neutral party that are looking after the interests of the world and are willing to move people around on their chessboard to achieve this like greater good. Almost. I feel like in this book we really saw the individual agendas of the Aes Sedai and how they're actually, I feel, manipulating people in their own favour. I still don't know if the men that wield the power actually go mad, or whether it's just something that Aes Sedai has said, because the men are more powerful than they are. So I'm really interested now that Rand is training all of this men, because we're seeing Rand going mad, but Rand is sharing a consciousness almost with Lews Therin. I believe that this is like a core like discussion topic in the Wheel of Time series, like is Rand going mad or is Lews Therin in his head? I believe Lews Therin is in his head and that he isn't going mad at all. It's just the struggle of having like obviously this different person kind of forcing themselves forward from the past, and that is what Rand is struggling with. I don't necessarily believe that it is madness, although saying that, having that happen to you can very easily lead to madness. So I do feel like that's an interesting topic to discuss, but I'm still not, like, especially in this book, we got more and more reason to distrust the Aes Sedai, and the men potentially not actually going mad is something that I've thought for a very, very long time. Also, is Verin a dark friend? Is Verin a dark friend? I don't know. Like, I have always kind of been inclined to trust Verin, but then some of her motivations, some of her actions are a little bit suspicious. So that is somebody I'm also going to be keeping a very close eye on going forward. I'm super excited to get into book 7. I am going to be continuing with the audiobooks. I feel like a big reason of why I'm suddenly enjoying these books so much more is related to me listening to the audio as opposed to trying to get through these physically. I just think it's just a much more accessible way of working through the pacing in this series. So I am very excited to get into book 7. A little bit nervous about us heading into the slog era of Wheel of Time, but I actually love a slow book. I don't know if I love a slow book on Robert Jordan standards, because I feel like that can be exceptionally slow, but generally these slower paced books where we have a lot of character development and not a ton of like action or plot progression, those books in a series tend to be the ones that I enjoy the most. Not saying that that is what is coming in books 7 to 10 because I haven't read them, so I don't know. But if it is, then I don't think I'm going to be too mad about it. So stay tuned for the 7th installment in this series. I think that I should be posting it potentially in March. As you all know, sometimes these are a little bit delayed, but they always make it to you eventually. But thank you so much for tuning into this video. If you liked it, please don't forget obviously to like it and then subscribe if you want to. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.